from the freeways of Houston, Texas, Toups Graphics presents an Algebra I tutorial quiz. Question number 1. Match the words to domain and range. Independent, dependent, y-axis, x-axis, input, and output. Let's start with the axis. The domain is the x-axis and the range is the y-axis. You need to also remember that the domain is the input value of a function, while the range is the output value of a function. And lastly, the range depends on the domain value. That means the domain is the independent value and the range is the dependent value. Question number 2. Find the range of the function f of x equals negative 2x minus 7 if the domain is negative 3, 2, and 4. Let's start by finding the range if the domain is negative 3. Using your calculator, keystroke negative 2 parentheses negative 3 close parentheses minus 7. If you were to keystroke these with your calculator, you would get negative 1, which is equal to our first range value. Now let's input 2 into the function. 2 would be our domain and the answer would be our output or range. Keystroke this into your calculator. If you were to keystroke negative 2 times 2 minus 7, you would get negative 11, which is our second output or range value. Now let's find our last input value, which would be the 4. F of 4 would be negative 2 times 4 minus 7. Punch that into your calculator. Negative 2 times 4 minus 7 would be negative 15. That means our range values would be negative 1, negative 11, and negative 15. Question number 3. Would this function have a positive or negative correlation? To get this answer, let's make a t-chart with the x values or domain on the left and the y values or range on the right. If you go down the chart, the x values get larger, but the y values would get smaller. This would give you a negative correlation. You can also remember that the coefficient of your x term will also tell you what correlation you have. Since the coefficient is negative 2, you would have a negative correlation. This video is sponsored by correlation. Do you need to know how two sets of numbers relate to each other? You need to know the correlation. It's also sponsored by the less than symbol. Do you need to show that the left-hand quantity is smaller than your right-hand quantity? You'll need the less than symbol. Your Algebra I quiz will continue after this commercial break. This Pentagon T Algebra I quiz is brought to you by the compound inequality. A compound inequality is a combination of two inequalities. Let's see how it works. Let's make a compound inequality out of x greater than 4 and x less than or equal to 9. Before we begin, let's graph each inequality. The x greater than 4 would have an open dot over the 4 with the shaded arrow going to the right, shading in all values greater than 4. The x less than or equal to 9 would have a closed dot over the 9 with the shaded arrow going to the left, shading in all quantities smaller than or less than 9. To join our inequalities together, we need to flip the one on the left to move the x to the right. X greater than 4 is the same thing as 4 is less than x. We'll leave the x less than or equal to 9 the same. Notice that the x's are in the middle of our inequalities now. Since the x's are in the middle, we can combine the two x's into one x. If we group our two x's into one x, our compound inequality now states that 4 is less than x and x is less than or equal to 9. Now that we have rewritten our compound inequality with the 1x, let's graph the compound inequality. We'll need to draw a number line and put the quantities of 4 and 9 on the number line. Like on the top, the 4 would need an open dot, while the 9 would need a closed dot. If you look at the above graphs, the arrow on the 4 would go to the right and the arrow on the 9 would go to the left. That would connect the two dots. A good rule to remember is that if a compound inequality symbols point to the left, you would connect the dots. The Pentagon T always believe Algebra Quiz continues. Question number 4. Emma Sue's grades are 76, 93, 74, and 78. What must Emma Sue make on her 5th grade to average an 80? To get this answer, you need to find the total sum of the 5 grades. She wants to average 80. That means 5 divided into the total sum must be 80. To get the total sum, you need to multiply 5 and 80. The total sum would be 400. That means Emma Sue's 5 grades must have a sum of 500. We know that our 5 numbers must add up to 400. So let's find the sum of the 4 grades we know. 76 plus 93 plus 74 plus 78 is equal to 321. Now we need to subtract 400 from 321 to find out what the 5th grade is going to be. The difference of 400 and 321 would be 79. Emma Sue must make a 79 on her 5th grade to average an 80. Question number 5. Solve the inequality. 4x plus 5 minus 7x is greater than 29. To solve this inequality, we must first combine our x quantities on the left. 4x minus 7x would be negative 3x. So our inequality would be negative 3x plus 5 is greater than 29. The next step would be to define the constants of 5 and 29. To do this, we need to subtract 5 from both sides of the inequality. Now our inequality would read negative 3x is greater than 24. The next step would be to divide the negative 3 coefficient into both sides. You need to remember that if you divide by a negative coefficient, you need to flip your inequality. 24 divided by negative 3 would be negative 8. We need to flip the inequality, so our answer would be x less than negative 8. Question number 6. Bubba Bob's gas tank has 30 gallons of gas. He uses 2 5/10 gallons of gas a day. Write an algebraic expression that will give you the amount of gasoline he has left after X number of days. Remember, to get this answer, we could use gx plus s, the growing number times x plus the starting number. In this problem, we're going to use 2 5/10 gallons of gas a day. That would give us a growing number of negative 2 5/10. Bubba Bob starts off with 30 gallons of gas. That means our starting number would be 30. Now, if you replace the quantities of G and S into Gx plus S, you would get negative 2 5/10 x plus 30. That is the expression to give you the amount of gasoline he has left after X number of days. The problem we just did represents a functional relationship between the number of days and the amount of gasoline Bubba Bob has left in his gas tank. What would the independent quantity of this functional relationship be? To get this answer, we need to remember that the independent quantity represents our input, or the number we would plug into X. One way to think of our input would be to make a T-chart. If we made a T-chart with columns of X and Y, the 1, 2, 3, 4 would represent what in the problem? If you were to go and read the problem, he uses 2.5 gallons of gas a day. The days are the input values, or it would be the days would be the independent quantity. And question number 8. Using the same problem, what would represent the dependent quantity? To get the dependent quantity, you need to remember that's equal to the Y quantity. Our answer would be the number of gallons he has left. As the days increase, the number of gallons would decrease. So the dependent quantity would be the amount of gasoline Bubba Bob has left in his gas tank. And finally, using the same problem, would this have a positive or negative correlation? Remember, you're comparing the days to the amount of gas he has left. As the days increase, the gas decreases. This would represent a negative correlation. This Pentagon T Always Believe Algebra quiz is sponsored by the growing number. Do you need an easy way to remember the common difference of an algebraic sequence? You need to remember the growing number. Time for a commercial break. This Pentagon T Algebra I quiz is brought to you by the compound inequality. Let's look at another type of compound inequality. In this compound inequality, we'll compare x less than or greater than 2 to x is greater than 3. The first thing we'll do is to graph each inequality. The x less than or equal to negative 2 would have a closed dot over the negative 2 with the arrow shaded to the left. All quantities less than or equal to or smaller than negative 2 would be shaded. On the x greater than 3, we would place an open dot over the 3 and the arrow would shade to the right. All quantities larger than or greater than 3 would be shaded. The next step is to flip the first inequality. X less than or greater than negative 2 can be flipped to negative 2 greater than or equal to x. Both represent the same quantities. We'll leave our next inequality the same. X greater than 3 will keep the x on the left. Like the last inequalities, our two x's are now in the middle. We can group those identical quantities into one, putting one x in the middle. Now our inequality states that -2 is greater than or equal to x, which is greater than 3. Now that we've combined our inequalities, let's graph the two inequalities. We need to place -2 and 3 on a number line. The first step to graph our inequalities is to place the dots over the numbers. We'll put a closed dot over the -2. The 3 would get an open dot. Now that we've got our dots, we'll draw our arrows. The left arrow will go to the left, just as the above graph illustrates, while the right arrow will go to the right. Notice that the dots are connected, they're separated. The rule to remember: in a compound inequality where the arrows or symbols point to the right, you need to separate the dots. From Discovery Green Park in Houston, Texas, the Pentagon T Algebra I quiz continues. Question number 10. What is the range of the function f of x equals 2x to the second minus 9 if the domain equals -2, 0, and 4? Remember, the domain is the input value of the function and the range is the output value of the function. So we'll need to input -2, 0, and 4 into our quantity of x. The first thing you want to do is to rewrite the problem and replace the variable of x with an empty set of parentheses. Now you'll input the values for the domain. First, input -2. Type this into your calculator and hit enter. You should get a value of -1. That's our first range value. Now we'll input 0 into the open set of parentheses. If you input 0 into the parentheses and keystroke this on your calculator, you'll get -9. That's our second range value. Now we'll repeat the process and put a 4 into the empty set of parentheses. Now you'll keystroke 2 parentheses 4 close parentheses x squared minus 9 into your calculator. You should get a value of 23. That's our last range value. So our final answer would be, the range would be -1, -9, and 23. Today's quiz is sponsored by correlation. Do you need to compare one quantity to another? You need a correlation. And also quadratic function. Do you have a function with an x to the second power? It's a quadratic function. Your Algebra I quiz continues as we bike down Smith Street in Houston, Texas. Question number 11. The function f of x equals 2x to the second minus 9 would graph would it be a line, a circle, a parabola, or an ellipse? Remember, f of x equals 2x to the second minus 9 is a quadratic equation. And quadratic equations graph a parabola. The answer is C, parabola. Question number 12. The domain or independent quantity would be graphed on what axis? The answer would be the x-axis. Remember, the domain or independent quantities are graphed on the x-axis. Time for a cross-curriculum commercial break. Where's Andrew? The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were both signed in this city. Answer: Philadelphia. This battle site was the turning point of the Civil War. Answer: Gettysburg. On this site in Federal Hall, April 30th, 1789, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States of America. What city was George Washington sworn in as our first president? Answer: New York City. From the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the Pentagon T always believe Algebra I quiz continues. Question number 13. What would the range of the graph be? Remember, to get the answer, you need to remember that the range corresponds to the y-axis. You need to find the maximum and minimum values of the graph on the y-axis. Let's find the maximum value first. Find the highest point on the red graph. The highest point on the graph corresponds to 2 on the y-axis. Now we need to find the lowest spot on the red graph and get the minimum y value. The lowest part of the graph occurs at -1 on the y-axis. That means our range values range from -1 to 2. That corresponds to choice C in the answers. The range would be from -1 to 2. Question number 14. Identify each situation as a positive, negative, or no correlation. Situation 1. The amount of gas in a vehicle and the miles driven. Situation 2. Your birth date and your shoe size. And situation 3. The size of a candy bar and its cost. Let's first try to find the positive correlation. In a positive correlation, both quantities would increase. The positive correlation would be the size of a candy bar and its cost. As the candy bar increases in size, so would its cost. So the size of a candy bar and its cost have a positive correlation. Now let's try to identify the negative correlation. In a negative correlation, one quantity would increase while the others would decrease. Situation 1 would be a negative correlation. As the amount of gas in your vehicle decreases, the miles you drive would increase. One quantity increases while the others decrease. So situation 1 is a negative correlation. That would leave situation 2, your birth date and your shoe size, as no correlation. Your birth date has no effect on the size shoe you wear, so it would not have a correlation. Question number 15. Simplify the following algebraic expression. 8x minus 4 parentheses 2x minus 3 close parentheses plus 6. To get this answer, we must first distribute the -4 to the 2x and the 3. -4 times 2x is -8x, and -4 times -3 is +12. So now we have 8x minus 8x plus 12 plus 6. Now we need to combine our like quantities. The 8x's will cancel out, and 12 plus 6 is 18. So the answer would be 18. This quiz has been sponsored by Pentagon Tea. Do you need to believe? You need Pentagon Tea. It's been produced by Toups Graphics. Toups Graphics. Always believe.